Live in a constant state of fear and misery. Do you miss me anymore? Live in a constant state of fear and misery. Do you live in a constant state of fear and misery? Do you miss me anymore?
Hello, everybody. Today is Thursday, December 6th, and we're bringing you Block Digest number 144 at block height 552,799. And I am sad to say I am back in America.
Oh, man, it's all right. Glad to have you back, man. Back in country. It's feeling kind of cold over here. A lot colder than over there, I imagine. But how's it going today, guys?
Watching the floppening.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. There's been a lot going on this morning, for sure.
Fuck snow. I want 80-degree weather back. Boycott
No,
winter.
I want more cold.
No.
More.
Global warming, come on. Why aren't you warming?
What I'm bad Shinobi. Do you guys think that we're going to be able to get to episode 150 by the time the year ends?
Math, maybe if I don't find more excuses to run away and not keep the schedule.
Yeah, I think we might just pull it off. Maybe.
So what you're saying is a New Year's break where I run from the winter again. Okay, where should I go this time?
Yeah, I'm already thinking about a New Year break back down to some Cajun land. I don't know. We'll see though. See
Australia.
What's going on. Australia. Oh no. No.
Australia got high and they cut their penis off. I want nothing to do with them.
What's going on there, man? They signed some legislation last night or this morning.
All right, longer than normal rant before we get into the Bitcoin stories. But Australia literally lost its mind and cut its dick off and signed into law the Access Assistance Bill, which pretty much makes end-to-end encryption illegal and makes it a criminal offense to not assist the Australian government in compromising a system that you have access to. So let's give a round of applause to our retarded cousins from the South, effectively making using the internet illegal. Come on, everybody.
Man.
Well, I just want to also congratulate, I believe it was the UK government, specifically GCHQ, that recently, before this bill was really getting attention on social media, I noticed that GCHQ published some kind of statement saying that they were interested in not breaking end-to-end encryption or forcing compromise and stuff. What they wanted to do was to surreptitiously add themselves to all of your communication channels so that they're still encrypted, but they can read them, but you don't know that they're participating in the conversation. Which it's like imagine if someone slid into your DMs and you didn't know that they were there. It's kind of like that. Which I don't know if that's a worse proposal than what Australia just did, but it definitely sounds creepier.
I don't know, man, guys. This sounds like par for the course. I mean, like a long time ago, these guys were, man in the middle between the telecommunication companies and, what you're doing on the internet. And they just passed the, that anti-net neutrality legislation here and propaganda. I think things are going so backwards. I don't know. It's been that way for a while. And now these other guys, they're just like, I don't know. They got to catch up.
See, Britain doesn't want to stick it in all the way like Australia. Just the tip. They're very gentlemen about it.
Yeah, they're just going to break end-to-end encryption, huh? So anybody that has some encrypted message they want to hear, it's now illegal to say that I'm not going to decrypt that message out of that person's right to privacy, huh?
Well, yep. Like I said, Australia got high and cut its dick off. What are you gonna do?
I don't know, guys. That sounds rough. But what's been going on in Bitcoin, man? Or should I say Iran?
All right, so CoinDesk, I am kind of shocked to say, actually did something that you could call real reporting. So they reached out to Mohammed Gorbanian. I know I'm not. I don't care. I've just given up on pronouncing things correctly. One of the Iranians put on the OFAC sanction list, which we covered in the last episode. And yeah, things are really not looking anywhere close to as simple as the Department of Treasury made them out to be. And this is really just kind of proving everything I said about how completely horseshit the heuristics for blockchain analytics are if this story holds up. And so they actually did a small interview with him and asked him, I think, 4 questions. And just as a little bit of preface, pretty much he's admitting that he engaged in trades to convert these specific Bitcoin that are claimed to be tied to the SamSam ransomware incidents into Iranian rial. But he is claiming he is just a peer-to-peer exchanger in Iran, and that he actually performed KYC with all of the people who engaged in these trades with him. And so pretty much in Iran, the legal requirements, according to him, in making exchanges like this are simply a selfie with your bank card and your government ID and a telephone number. So pretty much the same kind of requirements, I guess, that local Bitcoin traders in America have to follow if they actually give a shit about crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And pretty much he is saying that he met the 2 other people mentioned in the OFAC sanction list through Telegram and WhatsApp, which is what he says is the most common way for people to engage in Bitcoin trading in Iran. And that they complied immediately with his KYC procedures, produced their IDs, their bank cards, allowed themselves to be photographed, provided a phone number, and conducted all of their communications through these apps, of which he has kept screenshots of everything, which is also a requirement in terms of record keeping for each trades. And to take it another step further, this man is claiming that the other 2 individuals named, in his opinion, are likely not involved with the SamSam ransomware either. Saying that in one of their exchanges with him, they'd actually mentioned directly selling 50 Bitcoins by themselves, and that they did not require his services for that deal. So kind of implying that they too are engaging in peer-to-peer Bitcoin trading. And so far, the steps this man has literally gone to the Iranian authorities, the cyber police that deal with things like this in Iran. He has provided all of the information that he's collected with these trades, the people he's engaged in these trades with, and it states multiple times in this interview that he has complied with Iranian law regarding exchanges like this every step of the way. And one of the questions that CoinDesk asked him was, why didn't he require more information than he had been gathering in order to keep records on capital flow and track the people he's engaging with? And he reiterates that as far as Iranian law is concerned, he has followed the law to a T every step of the way. And he has gone through all of this with Iranian authorities right now over the last weekend, I believe, and is pretty much at the point where the Iranian authorities are dealing with this, and I'm assuming eventually are going to reach out to the U.S. and the Treasury Department regarding their listing on the OFAC sanction list. And really, at this point, it's kind of out of his hands, because it's not really reasonable for somebody in his situation in a foreign country to be expected to effectively step out of his own jurisdictions and deal directly with the United States authority when he is a foreign citizen. He has complied with every aspect of the law in his country in terms of making deals with like this. And it's pretty much down to the Iranian government and authorities to deal with the U.S. authorities and attempt to provide all the evidence that this man has provided them and deal with attempting to remove him from the OFAC sanction list, which is actually something that anybody sanctioned on the list can do. There are established procedures and applications to provide evidence and have yourself removed from these lists. But assuming, and I see no reason really at face to doubt this, that all of these facts and this man's story hold up, this is pretty much just an individual or individuals being put on an international sanctions list by the Department of Treasury for something that they had absolutely no direct involvement in whatsoever. And the entire basis of this decision was completely broken heuristics used by blockchain analysis companies that is pretty much just fancy guesswork. It's just them putting down a handful of rules regarding patterns that if they see, they make wild assumptions about, and just compiling entire databases based on guessing and assuming things. And this has literally led to the United States government sanctioning somebody with no actual basis in terms of evidence that he has been involved directly in the activities that he was sanctioned for. And I mean, I can really think of no better example to just show how completely flawed and broken blockchain analytics are, even on a blockchain like Bitcoin, which is completely open and public. There is no concealment by design of any of the metadata inherent with interacting with the chain itself whatsoever. The only concealment is simply the metadata that connects things on chain to off chain. And even this public of a system has completely fucked up a major government with a budget of millions and millions of dollars to deal with something like this in a way that's just laughable. And so it's like honestly, I want to point at this. Like when you hear people claim that Bitcoin is not private enough, that fungibility is a complete disaster waiting to happen without going into something like full-on CT and ring signatures like Monero or zero-knowledge proofs like Zcash. Yeah, in the long term, it's definitely not a bad thing to have things like that if the negatives are dealt with to the point where you have a good balance of negative and positive trade-offs. But to claim that this is a disastrous or dire situation right now, I think looking at this whole situation is absurd.
Yeah, this is something where, we were kind of just speculating on what's going on with these addresses and, how exactly are they going to, censor these addresses. But yet alone, yeah, we probably should have been digging a little bit more into the chain analytics of how exactly they got to, are these addresses belonging to the SamSam ransomware, people. And, yeah, I mean, just if this article is true, and like you're saying, it doesn't, I mean, it adds up to the bigger picture of the way like Bitcoin can be used with the pseudo-anonymous addresses. And, you could take steps to, make your transactions even more private, like with coin joins and just doing things to mask your IP. I mean, yeah, we probably should hold some real scrutiny to them if they're going to be like, well, these addresses should be censored. It's like, okay, well, how exactly did you get to the fact that this is that? And I mean, still, it just, Yeah, I mean, I guess they don't want to show their cards on what exactly they are analyzing on the chain to try and get to some of these assumptions. But yeah, it's definitely something where it's a good example of like how the pseudo-anonymous nature of Bitcoin really does have some features tied onto it and into it to where you can remain anonymous in the system. And yeah, I mean, it looks like that's what the Treasury Department is starting to learn. And maybe it's going to take some of these big investigations and some money spent in order for them to learn that, it's not really, it doesn't really pay off to go after these guys and through this system. I mean, especially as we keep making more and more privacy upgrades. Because, yeah, I imagine they did spend some money on this investigation just to give themselves like a pretty little black eye in the fact that they don't really know what they're doing. So, yeah, we'll see. Like you're saying, I mean, it's kind of going to have to. This is a long game. We're going to see how this story develops, but the immediate fallout from it looks pretty bad on what they were doing and how exactly they're trying to censor these addresses.
I mean, it's like think about this example. Like, I have some Bitcoin that I bought at Coinbase. Okay, they know that's me. I move that one address. I withdraw it. They know that's me. Now I go and I buy some Bitcoin from a random person for cash. They have no idea that's me. Now I link those two coins together and spend them to buy something. Well, what's that going to very naively show if there's not anything down the line in those coins I bought in person that identifies them as somebody else? Well, obviously, tracing that half back, all of the stuff that's connected to is mine. But that's dead wrong. Like, that is just absolutely dead wrong. And so what happens when the government comes knocking on my door in 2 years, and because of that transaction, they claim that I have like 1,000 Bitcoin that was connected back down that chain to a pool of things that I've never touched in my life? No, I don't. How do I prove that? I'm expected to prove a negative now? I mean, it's an absolutely absurd situation. But looking at the ridiculously simplistic assumptions that most chain analytics companies make, nope, those are two chains of coins, and you linked them, and we have your name on Coinbase tied to one half of them. So all the rest of those coins are yours too. And it's a completely broken assumption, but they just assume that. Just no, the inputs were in one transaction. One of those is tied to you, so all of them are tied to you. I mean, it's it's absurd. Like, to make a ridiculously ludicrous example, it's like, oh, I just paid for something in a dollar bill that has cocaine attached to it. Like all dollar bill. Oh, that must mean that you have cocaine. Like, no, it's a wild assumption that's just based on completely absurd logic. And lately I've really been harping on the idea that fungibility is more of a legal concept than it is the result of any kind of physical means of privacy. And ultimately, like, this is something that has to be addressed in a legal manner. Like, somebody in some situation eventually has to take these companies to court and just prove how ridiculously broken and erroneous their assumptions and the data they generate based on those assumptions are. Like, it has to be done. Or you're looking at an infinite number of opportunities for legal action to be taken on completely absurd information, like what happened in this actual instance with OFAC, or something like the hypothetical example I gave with Coinbase and something I bought in person for cash. Like, eventually somebody somewhere is going to get railroaded by the legal system because of some idiot who's just draining money from government contractors at this point. This is the IRS, the DEA, all kinds of agencies are starting to jump on board and patronize these chain analytics companies. And their life is going to be ruined. they're going to be financially ruined because some idiot sitting in a chair in some giant bureaucracy has no fucking clue what he's spending money on in terms of the service they're using and how accurate it actually is. And that's something that has to be addressed in the realm of the bureaucracy, which is the legal system.
Yeah, I don't know how exactly it's going to get there unless we, unless somebody actually gets penalized where they bring up the lawsuit against them saying that wasn't me. So, I mean, some of these things that we learn in the crypto space sort of takes an action and then a reaction in order for someone to learn something in this. And I hope it's not going to be like that. I wish, they could just look at the situation and say that technologically, it's really kind of infeasible to track these funds and say that this address isn't censored. But like you're saying, government bureaucracy is a pretty big machine, and they don't really learn too well unless one of their actions really comes back to bite them in the ass. So, it's one of those fears I've had for a while, just because you use addresses and you move some coins around, and you don't know where exactly those coins are going and whether or not they're going to come back to you. And I mean, that's where I just think doing everything we can to enhance these privacy tools we're getting, like, coin joins, once again, and using things like Dandelion and Join Market, all these sort of things that we have in front of us that we can use and take advantage of without really changing the base layer. I just keep improving those, and as time goes on, hopefully they'll recognize that it's just impractical to actually get down to the bottom of where this came from and what it's going towards, and hopefully not that many people get hurt. But it wouldn't be too much of a surprise if somebody ends up in a courtroom with some charges levied against them that aren't really supposed to.
It's inevitable. Like, it really is. And it just needs to happen and get done with before the scope of whatever incident lands in a courtroom just continues getting bigger. All right, though. Janine, comments?
Anything to say?
Sorry, screen is frozen. That was a joke about my screen can freeze more often than the US government can freeze Bitcoin transfers.
There we go with a quick whip.
Too quick. All right.
So what's going on with Bitmain?
Well, let me get some coffee. Let me get my e-cigarette, which I can once again legally use. And I don't have the energy to laugh, but this is fucking hilarious. So, a company based out of Florida, UnitedCorp, is suing Bitmain, Bitcoin.com, Roger Ver, Kraken, and a few others for hijacking the Bcash network. And so for just a little background context to this, UnitedCorp is a patent holding company founded in 1992, if I remember correctly, that mostly deals with IT and telecommunications patents and things like that. And they have a pretty long history of very patent trolly lawsuits and things. But specifically in dealing with the cryptocurrency ecosystem, mostly it's just a bunch of vague nonsense, like a telephone system directly over IP using the blockchain, a social media gateway using blockchain, just buzzwords, nonsense. And then really the only thing that actually has some kind of substance in the cryptocurrency space is a a mining operation that's effectively using greenhouse tents to generate heat for agricultural products using ASICs and proof of work mining. And they recently, I believe, maxed out the first facility they built and are now in the process of building out a second one. But like this is a pretty old technology company that has a long history of engaging in lawsuits. And objectively speaking, is a pretty small footprint in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, with only one thing I see that has actually produced concrete results so far. But this lawsuit has nothing really to do with patents, which makes it kind of stand out in a strange way from other litigation they've engaged in the past. And they have filed this in the Southern District of Florida, and are claiming that all of the defendants involved collectively engaged in unfair methods of competitions through a series of unconscionable, deceptive, and unfair practices, manipulated the Bitcoin Cash network to their benefit and to the detriment of UnitedCorp and other Bcash stakeholders. And pretty much the gist of the argument they have going on here is just beyond absurd. So they're claiming effectively that Bcash, as one of the most important cryptocurrency networks that's been established in recent years, is a peer-to-peer cash system between parties on the Bitcoin Cash network. Blah, 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 decentralized public ledger, blah, 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 highly cryptographic environment, is a democratic system decided through proof of work. And any entity that has 51% or more hash rate control in this network can undermine the democratic nature of the system. And they're pretty much accusing the parties involved in terms of manipulation of unfairly using rented hash rate to artificially take control of the network with redirected computing power to favor the adoption of Bitcoin ABC's rule sets over the maintained democratic rule sets. And once the ABC rules were established, stopped mining with the rented hash rate.
So they're pissed about the launch? That's it?
The lawsuit is pretty much claiming that for some ridiculous arbitrary reason, because the proof of work only ASIC stayed mining for a short amount of time instead of permanently, that this constitutes market manipulation. And then go on to mention the reorg protection functionality that ABC implemented, which what was the phrasing?
The checkpoints
allows maintenance of control on future implementations. And a direct quote from them: "We are bringing this suit on behalf of UnitedCorp because we believe strongly in the value and integrity of democratic, distributed, and decentralized blockchain networks, which will become more important with time. In order to maintain confidence in cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin Cash, no person or entity can be allowed to control them."
What exactly is democratic about it?
Nothing.
Yeah,
It's a meritocracy. It's however much money you can burn on hash rate. That's how it goes. Like this is not a democracy. These systems have never been a democracy. Like,
right. It's not just that. It's not just market forces. It's like they decided to create this option where they would put themselves in the place to where this could happen to them. It wasn't like this was a response because it was created. I mean, like they went into it knowing that this was a possibility. And yeah, I mean, it just seems kind of like a crazy lawsuit. I mean, like this is kind of what we were talking about with this, popcorn's going to keep going for a while in this Bitcoin Cash story and the way that this BSV is going to be around. And yeah, here comes the first lawsuit, I guess. That's pretty crazy, though. It's just about the fact that they rented hash in order to increase their hash rate during the fork, which could you countersue and say that, well, we were protecting our fiduciary duty towards people that are invested in the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem because BSV was a threat? Like, I don't know, man. This sounds pretty crazy. But, what do you expect, I guess, out of BSV and BAB now, right?
The entire basis of the lawsuit is, wah, my investment's worth dog shit right now. Wah, it's your fault. Wah. It's absurd. Like it's like the unsaid presumption here in the lawsuit is that you are only allowed to mine under certain arbitrary conditions. And because these groups mined outside of these arbitrary conditions in our imagination, it constitutes manipulation, and they should have to pay us money because our investment plummeted in value as a result of the actions undertaken by both parties in this blockchain split. And it's ridiculous. I mean, it's like, imagine if when Bcash first forked away, because most of the miners stuck with Bitcoin and didn't move over to Bcash, and the whole market didn't move over to Bcash, that they sued Bitcoin Core because you manipulated the market because you didn't implement the software that we wanted. I mean, it's completely absurd. Like, this is how these systems work. You can mine whatever you want. You can run whatever software you want. You can invest in whatever token emerges from individuals exercising their choice in either of those categories. And that's what happens. Like, there is no compulsory aspect to any of this. There are no preconditions to pointing your hash rate at something, to running some specific piece of software. You just make your choice, and then the market plays out. And I mean, like, honestly, I'd never heard of this company before this lawsuit happened. I'd never heard of this agriculture heat generation system that they're developing with mining equipment. And it's ridiculous. Like, so, it's even more ridiculous that they could have been mining Bitcoin while engaging in the same business model of reusing heat from mining operations. And the funniest part is, if this lawsuit doesn't get immediately thrown out, then Roger and Bitmain are going to have to spend money defending themselves from this in court. Like, we could wind up actually getting court transcripts of the arguments made over this nonsense.
And this is the second case against Bitmain recently, right? Because of that class action suit about the firmware in these S7s and S9s, mining for Bitmain ahead of the actual customer that purchased. So, yeah, they're bleeding from a couple ends, few ends.
Like, it's come on, Ginny, you have nothing to say about this. Oh my god. All right,
well,
that's it.
The only thing I'm wondering is, who do we think it is? Do we think it's just a bunch of normies who somehow got caught up in everything, or do we think it's secretly owned by someone who has more influence?
I think that this is just a bunch of idiots who diversified into something that they don't understand.
Okay, well, that doesn't answer my question. I mean, they could be complete normies, and they could be people of huge influence that we know don't actually know anything. So, for example, Craig Wright.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, I think Craig Wright's got to be behind it, right?
Like, whether they know what they're doing is, like, completely, beside the point, because neither of them would know what they're doing.
This is a decades-old company that's had a long presence in terms of patent management in the IT space. Like, this is just a bunch of clueless idiots who just hit a massive loss because they made a really poor investment choice, and they're just trying to point the finger and sue somebody because that's pretty much their business model prior to this space, is just holding patents and suing people.
Well, that sounds like someone very familiar, doesn't it?
Right. I mean, like we've heard Craig Wright talk on multiple instances about how he's going to sue over patent infringement. And I mean, you know, he's good friends with Calvin Ayre, and Calvin Ayre stays on an island, I think, pretty close to South Florida. I don't know. Is his island in Southeast Asia or the Caribbean? I think it's the Caribbean.
Yeah, I mean, I have no basis to connect it to Craig. It's just that there's so many similarities. What?
FUD!
I'm not saying there is a
FUD.
connection. I'm saying that it sounds a lot like him.
FUD. You're spewing
Okay.
FUD. FUD. FUD.
I don't know, man. There's a lot of possibilities, but I mean, I wouldn't rule out anything.
All I know is I want to see this go to court because I want to read these court transcripts. This will be more hysterical than Judge Mortimer and Rick Sanchez. if anybody watching knows that that court transcript done with two very famous voice actors.
Yeah, that Atlanta prosecution, that was hysterical, man. All right, though. So let's just keep running with this 51% attack and what's going on. So going into the next story here. Yeah, so all the recent discussion on mining and the hash rate hasn't just been limited to Bitcoin or Bitcoin Bcash. Sorry about that, Luke. Some of the smaller networks are finding themselves under attack too, with the drop in mining profitability for some of these inefficient miners or smaller farms who haven't properly hedged their position, find themselves in between a rock and a hard place trying to decide what to do. And some of them are deciding to pick up some profit elsewhere in the ecosystem. So far this year, we've seen 51% attacks and double spins on BGold, Verge, and now the latest hit is Vertcoin. Vertcoin kind of came up big trailing Litecoin all last year in its developments to manage the volume while the Bitcoin network was being spammed. A lot of every development that came out with Litecoin, like Vertcoin, would say the same thing. And basically, they were trying to be this bronze to Litecoin silver. But they find themselves in some trouble right now. So Coinbase engineer Mark Nesbitt put out a recent Medium post detailing the attack. He says that, quote, in 4 distinct instances, the latest of which is currently ongoing, Vertcoin experienced 22 deep chain reorgs, 15 of which included double spins of Vertcoin. We estimate that these attacks could have resulted in theft of over $100,000. The latest reorg was over 300 blocks deep. He goes on to detail out miners' role on the network, reorgs, and the details they observed on Vertcoin's chain. And since this is just the latest in a string of 51% attacks, he makes a solid statement of the situation these networks face. Quote, this recent spat of successful 51% attacks has significant implications on what is often referred to as the long trail of cryptocurrency assets. There are a large number of cryptocurrencies, including many based on Bitcoin, that implement their own proof-of-work-based blockchains. Observers of the industry have claimed that these assets have the same properties as Bitcoin. This claim has now been undeniably, empirically proven to be false. So, end quote. So those claiming to be money alongside Bitcoin are really going to get their meat put to the test during these hash rate or price drops when it becomes easier to attack these smaller networks. In fact, there is a website called crypto51.app that is used to give statistics on how much it would currently cost to pull off one of these attacks. And these are just mathematical truths, and it leaves the miners to decide what might be best for his bottom line. If some of these smaller farms or older, inefficient miners aren't profitable anymore on Bitcoin, what should stop them from trying to make profit somewhere else in the system? And while some might be upset about this behavior, it should be seen as market forces. In conclusion, Nesbitt says that exchanges are the most ideal targets in this type of attack, as they allow fast swaps between cryptocurrencies or tokens with limited confirmations. An attacker could make a swap and have a really deep reorg waiting in the wings. So we are currently learning something about ASIC development and how it could have fallout and affect some of these smaller networks that don't have the merit to back up their claims. Naturally, these developments have spurred discussion on Twitter, where Zoku took to the airwaves to blast these findings and shun those involved, saying, quote, "This is a serious problem. Nakamoto consensus is failing," end quote. Which Ansel was quick to point out how these are market forces that could be doing a good thing for this ecosystem, stating, quote, 51% attacks are valid and potential beneficial adversarial market behavior. Cleansing money printing scams from the ecosystem is a good thing. Stop whining and fear mongering. Right on, Ansel. So now, of course, with something going after someone going after brother-in-arms Zcash, Ethereum's king Vitalik had to step out to defend Zoku, saying nothing statement to only spur up argument, saying, quote, "This is how people actually think," end quote, referring to Ansel's latest comment. He then went on to say that, quote, "He's just repeatedly pointing out the profound illiberalisms inherent in maximalist values," and that, quote, "Actually, the underlying argument is that maximalist conception of freedom is incredibly thin, to the point where only literal guns and bombs violate it, rather than taking a more nuanced economic-based approach to distinguish categories of cooperation and competition." Ansel responded appropriately, saying, quote, "You misunderstand then. Of course, you can label people all you want, but you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone the above describes. Most of us are realists. Adversaries exist in the real world, Vitalik, unlike dancing unicorns," which that was a great comment. Good job, Ansel. I was reading these developments yesterday, typing up responses and deleting them instead of posting them, just because I don't really have the nerves to participate in some of these discussions, as I get pretty easily razzled. And I really wanted to dig into what the hell does Vitalik mean by freedom? What does he understand about that word? But this argument has a nice bow on it. And Vitalik claims that he was just pointing out, because adversaries exist, you shouldn't cheer them on, where he got a quick response from @real_duel, pointing out his congratulatory tweet toward Roger and Jahan for their malicious hard fork last year. And so, yeah, I think we are seeing more emergent governance within the greater cryptocurrency ecosystem based off ASIC development and those claiming to be money. And while some are unhappy about it, to me, it's an interesting computer science and economic scenario being played out in a voluntary system. I thought Vitalik put out a paper on how liberal these ecosystems are supposed to be. Turns out he's not too happy when others decide what they want to do. So I know more stories we have today continue to push into this discussion, but did you guys have any comment on this recent development with Vertcoin, the 51% attacks and fallout on Twitter?
Yeah, I think it's pretty laughable that Zoku is trying to claim this is a fundamental flaw in Nakamoto consensus when the entire the entire process is reliant on economic incentive, making an attack like that more expensive than the gains that you can get from them. And all it's showing is that some of these systems are insecure, not the inherent process. Like with Bitcoin, you would not be able to just cheaply accumulate enough coins and cheaply accumulate enough hash rate to pull off an attack like this that wouldn't make it profitable. The numbers don't add up. But when you have these ridiculously low price shit coins where you can scoop up a huge amount of the total supply for a ridiculously cheap amount of money, and then have systems where some of them literally cost a few $1,000s to perform an attack like that. It's that specific system that is insecure. It is not the entire process of proof of work. Like, we have to this day never seen an attack like this on Bitcoin. Like, since we moved past CPU and GPU into the ASIC era, like it's just not happened. It's not economically feasible. There is too much capital requirement to get your hands on the ASICs. There is too much operational costs in terms of the electricity to burn it. And there's simply not the opportunity to gain enough of the supply to make it profitable enough to effectively burn the system with all of the upfront capital and operational costs to perform an attack like this. Like Bitcoin is working just fine right now, and it has for 10 years. It's these little rinky-dinky shit coins that you can literally attack for a month's pay of some decently well-paid middle-class worker that are the issue here.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really like Nesbitt was saying, you know, the fallout on these exchanges. I mean, somebody could scoop up that supply, go and make a swap, and then do a reorg. And I mean, yeah, I mean, it could be profitable. And I think maybe Zoku and Vitalik are missing this. Like, you know, this is a space where there's an economic incentive to do things, and people do them voluntarily. And I mean, it's not really what I would say is. I mean, you could kind of label it as like good behavior or bad behavior, but those are just, I mean, those are kind of what's the word I'm looking for?
Moral
Those are
grandstanding.
well, it's like moral grandstanding, but it's also kind of subjective, right? Like where it's like that's bad. It's like, but this is the good thing for me to do, and like because I have my own incentives, and so yeah, I mean, it can kind of lead to a problem there where, you know, people don't really understand that this is pretty much just a neutral voluntary system, and somebody comes in with some economic incentive and your chain is pretty easy to attack, they might do that.
Mm-hmm. And also another aspect of this is, you know why you can perform these kinds of attacks with these shitcoins? Because you are able to instantly withdraw your profits on something like Bitcoin that is secure. Go try and pull an attack like this when your only option to withdraw is a USD bank wire. And watch how fast that wire transfer gets canceled after your reorg goes through on the network. Imagine a Bitcoin miner trying to pull something off like this with tens of millions of dollars, with no Bitcoin to withdraw all their profits from the exchange within 10 minutes in an irrevocable manner. No, it's not happening. Your bank wire would get stopped. It would get frozen. You would be out of luck because you just committed fraud. And actually, probably within the context of the U.S. at least, violated a number of laws on like the CFAA in terms of maliciously using or attacking a network system. And you're not going to walk away with that profit. Like it's the inherent security of Bitcoin's proof of work and the ability to instantly pull that profit out of these exchanges that even makes these kinds of attacks viable in the first place. If your only method for realizing your profit is the conventional banking system, you're not going to walk away with that. It's not practically going to happen.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of different factors at play here that can allow you to pick off one of these attacks and do something like this. But yeah, good luck trying that on Bitcoin. I think we saw a lot of people try to do something similar last year. It didn't really play out well. So, but continuing on, I guess, what did you have for us, Janine? Were you ready for that story?
Yep.
Janine!
I'm here. I have a lot to say. So, in continuing the civil consensus Ethereum clusterfest, this week there has been quite a few outlets kind of surprised how, I don't know if they coordinated or something, but there's been quite a few news outlets publishing articles about Joseph Lubin's influence on Ethereum and how he runs his company, Consensys. Also, you may have noticed just before this show started, people were laughing about the fact that the Ether price has apparently just dropped below $100, flop. The reason it's funny is because apparently, what's his face, Vinay Gupta published an article, I think last year, saying, what does $100 Ether mean? I think that was before before Ether had gone up to $100. So I think that's why they thought it was funny. But so kind of going through the articles that were published and the major points on December 3rd, a magazine or online magazine called Breaker published a letter or portions of a letter that Joseph Lubin supposedly sent to Consensys staff last Friday on November 30th. Should note that Breaker is owned by a parent company that Joseph Lubin co-founded. Might be a conflict of interest. But they did include quotes from the letter, and they also included quotes from him directly. So I guess they interviewed him on the night that letter was sent, perhaps organized in advance. Some of those quotes I will read off. We now find ourselves occupying a very competitive universe. While still in a position to succeed wildly, we must recognize that what got us here will probably not get us there, wherever there is. Very, very non-specific. We must retain and in some cases regain the lean and gritty startup mindset that made us who we are. We're going to get a lot more rigorous in terms of milestones and timetables. In Consensys 1.0, we built a laboratory instrumented to prove the moon existed using complex engineering and math and creative philosophical arguments. Now we need a streamlined rocket ship to get us there, since the actual proof ultimately is in the landing. I believe, possibly this rocket ship vocabulary is common in Ethereum, but I believe Andreas has a talk about how Ethereum is not very good at doing rocket science. They're mostly good at building things that blow up on the launch pad so far. The most informative section for me, though, in this part of this article in particular, was the following summary about Consensys' structure, written by Brian, the author of the article. It says, since February 2018, the company's workforce has doubled to more than 1,100 people spread across 29 countries. Much of that growth was funded by Lubin himself, who is said to be the world's single largest holder of Ether. Through it all, Consensys has held fast to a unique business model that prizes decentralization, worker autonomy, and project variety over efficiency. We'll get to that later and the discrepancies in some of that. Now, if you ever have taken a look at DApp Radar, which provides data about how applications on the Ethereum network are used and how many people use them, most apps don't have more than a few hundred daily active users. The DApp with the greatest number of daily active users is IDEX, which at the moment has 1,200 daily active users. The daily active user count for all applications on Ethereum is currently at around 4,800, down from a absolute peak that I saw of 32,000 in May this year. Very brief. It was like a couple of days, so it might not even be real. But this means that currently, even if we assume that Consensys was behind a majority of the apps inside of listed in DApp Radar, they have at best maybe 4 users for every employee that they reported to have hired, the 1,200 number. But I suspect that it's going to be closer to 1-to-1 because most of the apps that are listed at the top, I don't believe, like IDEX, for example, is not one of theirs. Hilariously, IDEX, the exchange that I said had the highest daily user count, actually bans users from New York, which is where Consensys is based. So Consensys can't even use that DApp. On December 4th, the Block thankfully published a full copy of Lubin's letter, so you can read it in its entirety. It's quite long, and they do a good job of pointing out the key parts, such as the so-called 5 pillars that Lubin says projects will now be judged against in order to receive funding at all or continued funding, I believe he said. So pillar 1 is, quote, driving a sustainable business centered around a culture of excellence and accountability. Pillar 2 is building foundational infrastructure for Ethereum and Web 3.0. Pillar 2 is investing in and building value-generating ventures that enable effective, efficient, and open business models. Pillar 4 is investing in and building value. Wait, oh, I might have copied. Okay, that's a bit weird. They might have listed the same one twice. So I have to go back and check that. Anyway, there are 5 pillars. You can read them in the letter. The last pillar was continuing to educate users to drive the mainstream adoption of Ethereum and Web 3.0, which I kind of think is a repeat of pillar 2. Anyway, pillars, lots of pillars. On December 5th, Rachel O'Leary at CoinDesk wrote about how the Ethereum community might just now be realizing that their heavy reliance on Infura, which is the hosted node company owned by Consensys, is a centralization risk. Because if you've been following my super long thread on Twitter about the Civil project, then you know that I referenced it back in October, because instead of hosting their own Ethereum and IPFS nodes, Civil was going to be using Infura, which previously I had not even heard of. I didn't even know that there was these services running, but apparently Ethereum is doing worse than I thought. And so that would be, in terms of Civil, that would have been just one more facet of their very centralized platform. The co-founder of Infura in this CoinDesk article said Infura accounts for somewhere between 5 and 10% of Ethereum nodes. Yet, because Infura nodes are highly reliable under 24-hour maintenance, they're accounting for a disproportionate amount of traffic. And he said, we're effectively supporting the entire Ethereum dApp ecosystem with the RPC traffic. So that's not very good. Forbes also published an article. Oh, before I go into that, I should mention there was a really funny tweet also tweeted right before the show started where I think his name was Eric Connor. He said, wow, if Bitcoin Maximalists put all the effort they do worrying about running an Ethereum node into improving Bitcoin, it might actually be a legit competitor. And it was funny because then someone replied asking, do you see any risks with Ethereum's reliance on AWS/Infura? By the way, Infura uses Amazon Web Services. So basically, effectively, the Ethereum network is running on Amazon. So someone asked, do you see any risks with that? And someone else named Evan Van Ness, I'm not familiar if he's a big person at Ethereum, but Evan says no. And then another person replies, isn't it just turning a blind eye? For most of the dApps, the value proposition is central point of failure and control. How is Infura any different? And he says, I have no idea what you meant by that. So that's quite funny. Getting on to Joseph Lubin, though, the Forbes article was probably the most not a good look for Joseph Lubin, basically. Let me find it really quick. First of all, it starts off with a quote from him that he apparently gave at a talk in San Francisco, which unrelated to Ethereum. I just thought it was really creepy, where he said, we designed Ethereum to enable machines and bots to be the first-class citizens. So be nice to the machines of this generation, lest some future artificial general intelligence who feels that you have been disrespectful to her ancestors decides to turn your carbon into something more useful to the future machine economy. That does not sound like something out of the Terminator. Moving on. Forbes then goes into how he became involved with Ethereum, his reasons for forming Consensys, specifically Consensys, the company, how the spokes of Consensys, he calls them spokes, which are basically, they're sometimes separate companies, sometimes just projects, but they fall under the umbrella of Consensys, where he provides the funding and the direction and advertising and stuff. And like if you're in Ethereum and you get like a tag like backed by Consensys, it's a big deal. They talk about the consequences of his very laid back approach to how his money is distributed, to the point where they even speculate that at the moment he may not even be a Daddy Warbucks benevolent billionaire anymore. And I should note that the label of benevolent billionaire specifically comes from his business operations lead at Consensys, John Lilick, who, as I have shown in my civil investigation, is apparently a fan of Saudi Arabia, which is really disturbing. The funniest thing, like there's many, many quotes in this Forbes article. I think maybe 1 or 2 employees actually, or former employees actually use their real name. Some of them don't. But the funniest part, I mean, I have to find it really quick, was the description of their was the description of the Consensys office, where someone named Jeff Scott Ward, he joined Consensys in June 2015, left the company in early 2018. He said, every day it was so lax that I'd walk in and didn't know if I had a seat. Literally, it was like Game of Thrones. And then I don't know if this directly came from him or someone else, but I think it probably came from him. He says that, yes, it did come from him. He says that in the Consensys office, there was one toilet for 30 people at the company, which I don't know if how many of you have ever worked in an office environment. I haven't, but I have lived with other people. And the idea of sharing one bathroom with even more than 3 people is a nightmare. So sharing a bathroom with 30 people in New York, no. that would be a nightmare. But yeah, that was the most funny quote. There's a few others about just they like the thing where he has this problem with sharing equity, that he usually has a lot of stake in all of the companies, a lot of influence, the spokes of Consensys. So it's not really, I mean, because there was this whole joke when Lightning was being developed that was going to be have spokes, and people didn't like that because, you know, still kind of, you know, centralized, not quite distributed infrastructure. So this language of like spokes is not really accurate because Consensys itself gets most of its money from Lubin. He did say that they are now going to be open to outside investment, which says a lot about how their current financial structure is. But so Consensys mostly gets its money from Lubin, and then the spokes mostly get their money from Consensys, which means they're getting their money from Lubin. Simple as that. Yeah, so a couple of interesting articles came out very recently about Ethereum and Joseph Lubin that I wasn't expecting, and some of them are quite interesting. So that was my summary of the parts that stuck out to me.
Well, I want to drag it back to the beginning and the whole Infura aspect and just say that my prediction of Ethereum devolving into a centralized scripting stack for a big database is, I think, moving along swimmingly well. Like, the fact that much of the DApp ecosystem and the end user wallet ecosystem is dependent on one centralized API is just beyond absurd. And I mean, like, really think about that. Like, Ethereum's only been around for 4 years, not even half as long as Bitcoin. And there's almost no use compared to Bitcoin. I mean, like, we covered a few months ago the analysis of on-chain activity with Ethereum, where something like 80% of the activity moving Ethereum around was just a money laundering bot, obscuring funds from different hacks and ICOs and shit like that. And in less than half the time Bitcoin's been around, under a fraction of its use, it is centralized so bad that almost everything built in the ecosystem is dependent on an API ran on Amazon Web Services. Like, the idea that this system can scale in any way even resembling decentralization or even just distribution among a large number of players is a pipe dream. And I mean, the solutions being put forward are ridiculous. Like, just build more Infuras, or just use light nodes that just grab the current network state, blindly trusting it, and don't actually validate any of its historical integrity. Like, this is how anybody can think that this system has any kind of long-term prospects is ridiculous. And in comparison, Bitcoin, that's been around for more than twice as long with a ridiculously larger user load, Like, I am constantly seeing new people spinning up their own node, building a business or a service on top of their own node that they control, they validate constantly. I mean, it's like something I see on almost a weekly basis.
Yeah, and I also want to point out the top quote in the CoinDesk article that I mentioned was from, hope I'm pronouncing the name right, Afri Shoden, and I just want to say, like, I really hope that if Ethereum does not survive, they come to Bitcoin, because they are one of the only persons I see actually saying something like Infura is a risk, this centralization stuff is a risk, and we should try to stop it. Whereas, that one tweet that I read off from Eric Connor, and the responses below it, that is the impression that I get from most people in Ethereum, is that it's not a concern to them, or at least it's not an immediate concern as it would be in Bitcoin if this kind of thing was happening. So yeah, I just would I wish more people could be like Afri, but I don't see that happening. So I just hope that they come to Bitcoin when it all goes down.
Well, you guys know that I'm kind of in an area where there's a lot of these Ethereum developers and users, and some Consensys guys are heavily represented around here. And I mean, like, I've been to some of these discussions where it is like, they're laying out how exactly their system's going to work. And then they, I asked the question, I remember, I think it was at the Althea Mesh network, where it was like, okay, so we're going to financially incentivize the spread of mesh networks. And how exactly are you going to spin up a node whenever whenever there's all this chain bloat? And, the quick answer was Infura. And then I was like, okay, well, isn't that a risk? And, yeah, but it's a problem that's going to be solved through, this or that, one of the plasma or sharding or whatever they're planning on doing, as far as trying to pretend like that there's not this problem with centralization in several little points within the Ethereum ecosystem. And, I know that some of the guys are being like, well, why are we talking about this and everything? And I mean, like, I think it's important that we at least do kind of just spread out this information, because it is like they don't see the problem of this centralization risk. Like, why is censorship resistant needed? Why is this something have to be immutable? And I mean, it spreads like wildfire. Just the people running with the buzzwords. I mean, just the other day on Joe Rogan, there's some AI doctor on there talking about how great Ethereum's global world computer is, and how they're going to solve the world's problems through sharding, and how you could securely send transactions, secure. He must have said that 100 times, where it's like, I don't think people understand the security risk of centralization. And, it takes people kind of pointing out some of the problems in this stack as to, like, this is why this is a problem. And I mean, hopefully there will be people that see it as a problem and don't go spouting off on a podcast with 100 million people watching, to where you just keep spreading that bad information. I think that this is just the environment we're in, where we have to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the other thing I think I don't know if I've said on the show before, but I definitely think, because I saw a tweet, I don't remember how long ago it was. I saw a tweet from, I don't know how to pronounce the actual pronunciation, but the handle is Arbadao on Twitter, and I believe he made a tweet like months and months and months ago saying that the greatest trick that Ethereum ever played was convincing people that Vitalik was the head and not Joseph Lubin. So I can't find that tweet anymore. He might have deleted it, but I do want to say I almost don't care I don't think Vitalik has that much influence, really. Like, I want to see what happens when Joseph Lubin takes his money out, or at least a significant chunk of it. Because, like, now he's like basically saying, I don't want to give you guys as much money as freely as I did before. Which may or may not be affecting the price of Ether. I don't know how those kinds of signals influence the price, or if that's just, bear market continuing, like with all the cryptocurrencies. But yeah, I would like to see what happened. Like everyone's like, oh, what we should get Vitalik out and then we can prove that Ethereum's just like, no, if you get Vitalik out, it'll just be Joseph Lubin. Like Joseph Lubin is the one.
Right. I actually wrote that quote down because I wanted to say it, but I couldn't say it in that comment. I'm so glad you say it. I'll repeat it. The greatest thing Joseph Lubin did for Ethereum was convince everyone that Vitalik is in charge. And I mean, like, that's, yeah, I mean, if he's the real guy that's like funding a lot of these projects and keeping these dApps and these ecosystems, and then the press to spread it outward as far as possible. And I mean, like, Vitalik does use words where it's like just in his mind it makes sense, and his mind and some other people that might be brilliant minds in certain fields, but they hear that and they think, well, this guy's another brilliant mind like I'm a brilliant mind, and they just buy their own bullshit. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's an aggravating thing whenever you see people just like, oh yeah, Vitalik is such a genius. It's like, well, can you prove any of that? Because like a lot of this that he's been building out just sounds like it's one meme to another meme, and then there's some trouble within it, and we'll find an answer in the future. Promise, guys. It's like all I ever really hear from him.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say, because obviously I originally started looking into this stuff because I was responding to the fact that Forbes partnered with Civil. I wonder how that's going. I've been considering that Forbes wrote one of the most damaging articles about Joseph Lubin. Finally, something that I actually think was, a interesting article from Forbes. But so I started looking into it because Civil is like a journalism on the blockchain project, and I thought that was ridiculous, and I was initially criticizing it. And one of the things that they said in like their reasons for existing is that they want to be billionaire proof, which I thought was, considering, how much Consensys has involvement in buying a bunch of their tokens and running their infrastructure and all of that. In this whole benevolent billionaire language from John Lillick, it's like, I'm sorry, did you only want to do it billionaire proof for malevolent billionaires, or just the ones who give you lots of money and don't try to shut you down like what's his name did for Gawker, which, by the way, go away, Gawker, don't care about you. But yeah, not exactly billionaire proof. And apparently Ethereum isn't either.
I can never remember that guy's name. Who's that billionaire that took down Gawker?
Alrighty, moving along. Next up in the things thrashed by the bear market is ETCDev, a company that was established after the Ethereum hard fork after the DAO to take up a lot of the ETC side maintenance, including the Geth client, the Golang client for Ethereum that they've pretty much been maintaining since the fork in 2016. And so pretty much the price smashing down. I think last time I checked, ETH Classic was only worth a few dollars. They've pretty much been screwed in terms of their capital, hit a cash crunch, and are shutting the entire thing down. And really, there's a decent amount of other things in the space. You've got the IOHK with Charles Hoskinson, ETC Co-op, ETC Labs. You still have people pretty much contributing in their free time. But these guys maintained the Geth client. They maintained a library. I think it's called Emerald, for building out dApps or wallet products and shit on a number of different platforms. They maintained the Emerald wallet, which they built out using that framework for people to have a wallet to interact with ETH Classic, and as well a project whose name I can't remember at this moment, but it was designed as a standalone Ethereum virtual machine implementation, more tailored towards embedded systems to be able to run through scripts and shit on a local machine. And like, you know, as much as you have people like Charles or other people involved in this space claiming that there's other contributors, like this isn't really going to mess anything up. I mean, this is a decent hit for the ecosystem. I mean, you're looking at a major wallet, one of the major core clients, a library for building out dApps and other pieces of software in the ecosystem, which I'm not really paying attention enough to ETH Classic to see how widely it's used, but none of this stuff is going to be maintained anymore unless other companies or projects in the space step up or volunteers fill in the gaps. I mean, this is just wrecked. And I mean, like the really only the point I want to make here is, you see this kind of pattern a lot in a huge number of these shitcoins out there. Is there's centralized funds generally in the coin that the company or project is built around that are funding all of this. And when that goes down, there goes the money. And there's really like not much out there that's exempt or safe from this. I mean, even the Ethereum proper chain is funded by the Ethereum Foundation and their fund. And even though they're way better capitalized and sitting on way more cash reserves, I mean that this exact same kind of situation is a possibility or vulnerability for them as well. I mean, I can't really point at anything in this ecosystem offhand except Bitcoin and Monero that really have a thriving development community and a large number of players invested in building out and maintaining the software and the infrastructure in a way that is resistant to this kind of bear market just smashing funding source to pieces and leaving a lot of these things unmaintained. And I mean, you know, like Rick was talking about a lot earlier when we were discussing the Vertcoin attack. I mean, this is just another angle of how a lack of capitalization and a huge drop in price can really hit projects like this hard. Like it's not just the cost to attack a chain using proof of work that's the only factor here.
Right. I mean, like we were saying earlier, it's the economic incentives, and I mean, it's done it to yeah, the price fall there is pretty heavy, and so wouldn't be too surprising to see some people that are doing some heavy lifting on the development side of things sort of say, well, this isn't really worth our time anymore, and just sort of builds on exactly that, like that those 51% attacks and the consensus restructuring. I think we're starting to see a lot of this like market downturn really just starting to have some big fallout on a number of these chains that people thought were, the number two or whatever they want to say.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's bear market cleansing.
Yeah, it's sounds like a healthy ecosystem.
Alrighty, though. Next up, we have another leak from BTC King 555. And it's not really anything to back this up except his tweet. But, I'm going to go out on a limb here and take this as a valid source of information because he has really established himself as having his claims backed up consistently time and time again. But he's claiming to have gotten a leak of the Q3 numbers from Bitmain. And based on a loss of unsold inventory in their Bcash holdings, they're sitting on a $740 million loss for the quarter. $750 million. And that's not even looking at the costs of the hash war with the Bitcoin Satoshi's vision. And I mean, like this just like the thing I see here potentially playing out is investors stepping in, exerting more control, and liquidating assets. I mean, and whether that's just out of shareholders exerting board control, bankruptcy proceeding, it's really irrelevant because if any series of events leads to that, you're talking about 1 million Bcash being dumped onto the market on both sides of the chain right now without any of the buy support that Bitmain has been throwing to try to prop these chains up. Like, that would be the final nail in the coffin. Like, there is no way that either of the Bcash forks could survive that kind of massive dump with the huge free fall they're in right now, and without the actual artificial liquidity that's been propping them up this whole time. So, like, this would be the most amazing Christmas present on earth, to see Bitmain go bankrupt and Bcash smashed into the ground at the same time.
Yeah, just like you're getting my hopes up a little too much there for Christmas, saying Bitmain in bankruptcy. I mean, like, it could happen though. I mean, like, things are really looking rough. I mean, as far as last nail in the coffin, there's a lot of nails there, and yeah, it's hard to see how that they can make it through this. I mean, can you write off billions of dollars in losses? It's like, I mean, can you get a government bailout in Bitmain? I don't know. This is it's looking pretty bad.
This is wrecked. I mean, absolutely, utterly wrecked. And you also have King claiming somebody approached him attempting to dump shares in Bitmain. So, like,
Not good.
like this is like, I don't see any way that they can come back from this. Oh,
Yeah.
man.
I guess you reap what you sow, right?
Mm-hmm. All right. Moving along, I guess, then. This is stupid. All right. It is
What
just
is it?
stupid. South Korea is going to be piloting a blockchain voting system. In pretty much development with the National Election Commission and its Ministry of Science. They're going to be rolling out something based on the Hyperledger Fabric product from IBM, and piloting it in a survey capacity at first, where they're effectively just going to be providing surveys to users, asking questions about the experience and how easy it is to use, how well they see its performance, and slowly trying to scale it out, walking step by step towards trying to use it in actual democratic elections for the National Assembly, local elections, the presidential election. And it's just, I am so sick of hearing about blockchain voting. Like, I really am.
Well, I mean, like, I was gonna just make a comment. We better get prepared to hear more of this, because I mean, like, I know here in Colorado they're trying to build out this whole e-governance platform, and I mean, like, a lot of this stuff that you hear has to do with voting, medical records, deeds, and identity on the blockchain. I think we're gonna keep hearing those things until they get what they want.
Yeah, my only comment is I think Andreas made the best joke about voting on the blockchain, or especially medical records on the blockchain. I believe he once got a question from a viewer saying, how would a patient who's in a coma, who controls keys to their medical records on a blockchain, how would they like access it to like get care or something, or share it with the right doctors? And he was like, well, fortunately, the people who wrote the white paper for the medical records on the blockchain idea were in a coma when they wrote it.
Great joke.
I don't know if there's a similar applicable joke to blockchain voting, but yeah, no, sorry. Like, unless you're planning to do a decentralized currency just in South Korea and then use that for voting, I mean, that would at least maybe have some security, maybe. But if you're not Like seriously, any application that doesn't, if you're going to be using a blockchain and not an application on top of a blockchain, then you have to account for the currency aspect. You have to have some kind of incentive mechanism. And if you don't, there's no point. Just use a database.
Well, I mean, it's ultimately like I farted out an idea for air quote blockchain voting just reading this article that I guarantee you is a million times better than what they're designing. But I guarantee you it doesn't solve the issues that they want to solve with it. You show up in person with your ID, you register to vote, and you generate a private and public key. You blind that key like you would with a Xiaomi eCash server. Have an authority sign that key without knowing what it is, unblind the signature, and then you now have the authority's signature over that key without knowing what it is, and you have something you can use to vote without the signing authority knowing who has that key. But you still have to show up in person to actually verify your ID, because if not, I can steal your ID, I can register, and then you're not able to vote anymore because you're already registered. And how do you prove that? You like the convenience is lost. And then you simply sign a vote on a blockchain with that key. But then again, we're dealing with the key management issue. What is your device? Is it secure? Can that key be hacked? Well, then your vote can be undermined. The actual voting tally process. You set up a federated node system. Okay, people can verify that. But how do you verify that you don't have two conflicting things? What is the objective truth of the current state of the vote? If there's a disagreement there, the whole thing falls apart. Like there is no way I can see to do a system like this that gets what people want out of it, which is hit a button on your phone conveniently without having to show up anywhere and register for anything in person, and we can just get everybody voting because you can do it from your couch. Like it's not going to happen, because all of the security steps that you have to take to make this secure through the whole stack will undermine all of the convenience that you want out of it. Like it does not make sense.
Yeah, there's some things where just like it's just hard to figure out what exactly is going to be the best solution. But I get where they're coming from. They, like you're saying, they want everyone to participate, and they don't want the numbers to be fudged with. And yeah, I mean, they're going to keep throwing it at us until somebody comes up with something. I mean, I really think it might be 2030, 2040. They're still talking about how they could do that.
Well, it's all stupid. So let's move on to the next stupid thing.
All right.
Homeland Security wants to develop a framework to effectively track Zcash and Monero transactions with blockchain analysis.
Wait,
So
wait, did you say Zcash? I thought
yeah,
Zuko's
I
whole
know.
master plan was to say like we're friendly with regulators and stuff like that, and that would like keep them away.
Well,
Is
it's
that
not
failing?
going to work.
Oh
But
my god, it's not going to work? Who would have thought?
the whole thing though is like they can't even do this properly with something like Bitcoin. So let's look at this for a minute. Monero uses confidential transactions. Confidential transactions alone still leaves a metadata footprint of inputs and outputs that can be tracked. It just hides the amount. Monero has tried to solve this using ring signatures, where you can grab inactive inputs and outputs generated in a transaction so that you obscure that metadata linkage. Now, it's not perfect, but it starts breaking the assumptions of inputs and outputs that are used. The only way, and again, I'm not in any means an expert on any kind of analysis trying to break Monero privacy. But the only one I'm familiar with personally is forking the chain. And then when people go to split their coins, you create divergent sets of inputs and outputs that are mixed with yours using rig signatures. And that gives, by comparing both chains, a way to differentiate the active outputs. So that is one way to do it. Other than that, I'm without any deep understanding of ways to try and break the anonymity, at a loss for how they think they can do this effectively when you have that added disconnection between inputs and outputs, when you can't even do it properly for Bitcoin, which is completely transparent. In the case of Zcash, well, first off, almost nobody uses the shielded transactions, so it's literally the same as tracing Bitcoin. If shielded transactions were actually widely used, then it's not happening. Like you are not going to establish a chain analytics system that works for something that's using zero knowledge proofs that are used by the entire system. It's just not going to happen. That's how those systems work. That is the biggest amount of privacy you can get through a cryptographic system like this. And it's like, this kind of, again, it just goes back to what I was saying during the first story with the OFAC list and the SamSam ransomware. Like, this needs to wind up in a court. Like, this needs to establish, there needs to be established a legal precedent, because if there isn't, organizations like the Department of Homeland Security are just going to make wild assumptions, establish crazy guesses, and just start throwing legal charges at people based on them. And if there is no kind of legal fight put up against it, then it's just going to fly. And it pretty much boils down to just, we accuse you of something, so that's what's true. And that is a completely untenable way to move forward in this ecosystem in terms of dealing with law enforcement and reality. And two, it just completely flies in the entire foundational principle of a legal system, at least in the West, in America specifically, of the presumption of innocence. You are innocent until you are proven guilty.
We lost that.
And it's not a healthy thing to just sit back and go, government doesn't matter. Cypherpunk, rah, 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 fuck laws, write code. Like, this is the real world. And in the real world, if you ignore things like this, if you just lay down and let it roll over you, then you will get fucked. And there needs to be an acknowledgement of that reality instead of just trying to hide from it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but going back to the first story about the Iranian addresses and someone might need to go to court, I mean, if that person doesn't have a backing and ready to put up a fight, they could definitely get rolled over and just thrown in a cell somewhere, and it'd be really hard to get out. I mean, like, we've seen this public imprisonment of Julian Assange, and it's like, just look at how hard a time he has getting out of there. But yeah, I mean, like, just going back to this story for a second, I mean, I guess I get where they're coming from as far as like all these, different organizations within the government trying to do something that they think's their duty to do. And so they start trying to figure out how they can prosecute someone whenever they think that one of these chains is being used for malicious activity. And I'm just curious what you think, man. I mean, like, this is where I think like Fluffy Pony and Zoku are in like the worst position, is like, do you think they could just go after them, and like what would that do?
It's irrelevant. The systems are live. They're not going anywhere just because you take down a public figurehead, and it's irrelevant. Like this is just like the perfect example of bureaucratic morons acting like they have any clue what they're doing when they don't. They're just making shit up and pretending.
Yeah, it's hard to say what they could actually do because, like we're saying again with the first story, I mean, like they can't even really do that properly on the Bitcoin blockchain. So, yeah, you get into these with ring CT and shielded transactions. I mean, like you're saying, I mean, even if you get those guys, I mean, doesn't necessarily mean anything's gonna kill. That's gonna kill the chain. So, yeah, it's just it's hard to say what exactly they're gonna get out of this, other than they're just, I guess, trying to respond to things that they think is a threat.
They'll get nothing except the false sense of security, thinking that they can actually do anything when they can't. But
Yeah, we'll see them.
all right, though, four more stories to get through.
All right, but let's keep going.
So, anybody crying about the price right now? Wipe your tears off and grow the fuck up, because all the big money in the space is not. They are laughing with glee and filling their pockets with everything they can. So first off, Bitwise Asset Management in California is announcing the launch of two new crypto fund products, specifically a Bitcoin fund and an Ethereum fund, to add to their 10 private index fund, which is a crypto basket like the one recently launched by the Six Exchange in Switzerland. And they're specifically launching these because they've been getting massive amounts of customer demands for crypto specific funds in response to the huge drop in price over the last year. And right now, they are in kind of a heated competition with Barry Silbert's Grayscale funds, and are actually undercutting them in fees for maintaining accounts. Right now, Grayscale charges around 2% for its Bitcoin investment trust, and Bitwise is undercutting them with 1.5 for smaller accounts and 1% for larger accounts. And this is, I mean, this is the exact opposite of what I see a lot of retail investors doing right now, which is crying, wondering when everything's going to end. I mean, this is just the perfect example of when you see blood in the streets, you buy. And on top of this, Grayscale is continuing to increase its Bitcoin position and recently just hit over 200 BTC, which puts them at holding about 1% of the entire outstanding Bitcoin supply. And
200,000.
And the entire time that these prices have been crashing down, they have been ramping up their purchases of Bitcoin. And they've also been doing the same with Ethereum. And a lot of Ethereum whales, as insane as it is, and given the actual situation regarding fundamentals in Ethereum, are snapping up huge amounts of Ethereum to the point where, I think it's 20% according to Bitcoinist, is being held by a group of massive whales and funds. And I mean, yeah, Bitcoin is crashing. That's what Bitcoin does. But pay attention to everything going on in between the lines. Like, this is the accumulation period where massive amounts of infrastructure is being built out to create the seamless on ramps for the institutional class, for the wealthy investor, not the random people on the street who've been driving a decent amount of this market for the past few years.
Yeah, that's why. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that's why it just definitely serves a good purpose to come in with the longer viewpoint on all of this. And, if you were at one of those people that came in at the end of last year and, you're hurting, I mean, you should just be thinking about, long game and dollar cost averaging and try and get your position down. I mean, yeah, like you were saying, I mean, when there's blood in the streets, that's like when you should be looking to buy, and when everybody's saying sell, that's when you buy. I mean, like you kind of have to go against the grain of the greater crowd, because that's not the crowd that is wealthy, right? And I mean, the people that are trying to set things up for this long game, I mean, you see them making these moves. I mean, like, yeah, Bitwise and Grayscale just yeah, increasing their position while they can, because this time last year it was like, everybody's like, are we ever going to see 10,000 again? Are we going to see 5,000 again? I mean, and now here we are, above 3,500, and there's a lot of people saying that the world's ending. But I mean, people that have been here a while, and if you're just coming in or you've just got in, like definitely have that longer picture of this, and be thinking about this as like a really like this would be the time to try and accumulate some satoshis while you can.
If you actually believe in Bitcoin, then don't let Wall Street wind up with your coins. But to get through this next one real quick, just another example of that more measured attitude from institutions. Nasdaq and Fidelity recently participated in a $27 million round with ErisX, an exchange based in Chicago, that is going to be launching spot contracts in the second quarter of next year, and planning to offer futures contracts as well, pending CFTC approval. And they previously raised some money from TD Ameritrade as well. So this is another example. Like we've been talking and following the news with BAC and the NYSE and ICE for the past months, 2 months, while Nasdaq is jumping in the game now, and Fidelity is making more moves outside of their custodial product, and this is yet again even more infrastructure being built out. Like, do you really think that these kinds of institutions would be building out this type of financial infrastructure for large pools of money if this was all going down? If these people thought that this was not something that is going to be around for a very long time to come and actually generate some kind of return by building out this type of infrastructure. Like, this is like, Crypto Loco in the chat is sarcastically saying Satoshi's vision was to create a new Wall Street tool. Well, Loco, this is an economic system, and wealth and value is what drives that. And when this type of infrastructure builds itself out, this is here to stay. This is not going away. And just because you have put money into Bitcoin does not mean that you all of a sudden dictate how the system works. This is fundamentally the thing that is going to cement it into the financial system and test its anti-fragility. If Bitcoin cannot survive big money like this coming into the ecosystem, then it was never going to survive in the first place. But if it can, this kind of money, this kind of backing, this kind of integration into the financial world is cementing it in stone. It will never go away. I mean, just be real. How much influence do these kinds of organizations and pools of money have in the politics of the world? If they get behind Bitcoin, it is not going away. Governments are not sweeping it under a rug or stamping it down, because this class of people has gotten involved in it now. And they do not let their interests just get fucked with without doing something about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of thinking general as, I mean, there's within these organizations, there's individuals, and, they see problems, and also maybe trying to make a name for themselves. And I mean, can't just write it off because of the people getting involved. And I think if anything, yeah, it's just like it shows that bullish sentiment about how there are people from Fidelity, TD Ameritrade, and Nasdaq who are, you know, willing to jump in on one of these ventures because they see real promise in it. And you know, just because they're getting involved, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, legitimately, I mean, like we're saying, I mean, there's individuals within those ecosystems that see the problem. And a large part of the Bitcoin space, whenever I came in, and still, I mean, it's a large part is people in the financial sector that know there's a problem, and they don't want to participate in that. And so, you know, just because they're getting involved is not a bad thing. And yeah, I think it's actually, you know, pretty good thing, because like you're saying, it's out of Chicago. We know there's a lot of Chicago Bitcoiners that you know, they like, as far as places in the United States that have a good idea of what Bitcoin's trying to achieve and the way that it's moving forward, I would put Chicago up at the top of that list. And so it's a good thing coming out of there. You know, spots future market together, CFTC approval. It all sounds up to board, and you know, just one of those things that is going to help improve the ecosystem. It's just you know, sometimes it's not exactly the characters we want to participate, but I mean, you know, this is a voluntary system.
Mm-hmm. All right, now I guess we're going to touch a little bit more on what's going on in France, just because last time we talked about it, it was mostly concentrating on the confusing statement from the French authorities regarding the approval for tobacco shops to start selling Bitcoin. But I mean, like ultimately, these riots and protests going on in France, like I keep seeing this fixation with the gas taxes, with carbon taxes, and specifically a lot of conservative Americans painting it as an example of climate change is bullshit. But really, this is just a lot more complicated than that. I mean, there are taxes. Like France is one of the highest taxed nations in the entire European Union. Like their employee tax is 21%. Their gas tax 36%, banking fees 12%. They have a car registration tax that's 15%, health insurance 15%. Like you have a 5% tax on postal stamps. Like it's not just gas and carbon emissions. It is almost everything they're being taxed at an insane degree on. You have their monetary policy continuing to drive up the prices of things by diluting the purchasing power of their money, and the average people barely being able to make it to the end of the paycheck and feed themselves. Like this is not just a one issue thing. This is all of the systemic problems that result from the kind of monetary policy and systems that exist in the world today, and an entire country just getting fed up with it. And I mean, this is the exact reason why Bitcoin was made in the first place. A way to opt out, an alternative, something that is not subject to these types of controls and manipulations by an elite class in a privileged position of control. And like I do not want to support violence per se, but I will say that I perfectly understand why such a large percentage of the population in France has had it to the point where they will result to things like that. Because ultimately, if you don't, you will be ignored. And hopefully, like this will wind up being a catalyst amongst the larger population that they have an alternative besides smashing and burning things. That there is the tool right now at all of their disposal to just opt out, to put their savings, anything that they can scrape by with, into something that is not going to be diluted by a governmental monetary policy, that is not subject to the types of controls that their bank account is, and that they can just walk away. That they don't have to fight and smash and burn things to try to actively take control. They can just walk away and opt out. And hopefully, if things go that way, like if this tobacco shop system is actually set up and established across the entire country, we might witness another Venezuela in a more developed part of the world. And that might start waking people up everywhere else.
Yeah, I think you hit it nail on the head with, this is why Bitcoin is here, and it gives people an option that isn't violent and that they can participate in to exit that system and really just show their distaste for the way that that system is behaving. And yeah, when you see people out in the streets fighting, it's more complicated than really just one thing. I mean, that's been happening for years. Like maybe you don't remember the LA riots. It was like, oh, it was because of this thing. It's like, well, that was like the catalyst, but I mean, reality was it was like years and years of policing the wrong way and hurting a community. And so yeah, I've looked into it. It's like some tax hikes across the board, I'm sure, is hurting the average person. And like you're saying, I mean, it could just become the next example of from a more developed state, as far as people finding a way to avoid inflation of their currency and retain their purchasing power, and also just sort of a good way to say that we don't agree with this system and kind of give a little bit of pushback without that violence. And so yeah, I mean, I think it would be a great thing if these tobacco shops, just open up on the day they were supposed to, and we might see a large group of people opting out of that system. And just like to say, we're not far from that anywhere. Like, I mean, this is somewhere in the Western world, France, and I mean, like, pretty much all of us are susceptible to this. And so, yeah, I mean, we should all keep our eyes on it as far as Bitcoiners and what's going on there.
Mm-hmm. All right, and I guess 9 minutes to go. Last up, something I am very, very happy and excited to finally see come to fruition. Bitcoin Magazine is going to be shifting away from covering crypto in general and moving to exclusively covering Bitcoin. And just a few things I want to read out of the Medium article they posted. We're here for nothing short of a revolution, a complete reinvention of monetary and financial systems designed for a digital world in which the legacy systems become uncompetitive and irrelevant. This is the perfect attitude for a publication like this in this space. Like, move away from the horse shit and actually concentrate on what matters. And the next section, this is the promise of Bitcoin, just waiting for us to come and make it real. Creating this tomorrow will be a marathon, and it will require many of the world's brightest minds to add their intellectual capital to the Bitcoin system. We've let all of the excitement and wonder get sucked out of the room by smart contract protocols like Ethereum, forgetting the first Bitcoin 2.0 concepts were built on Bitcoin. Omni, colored coins, counterparty. We forget the first ICO happened via Bitcoin in early 2013, Mastercoin, now known as Omni. We forget the first crypto equities existed in 2012, Satoshi Dice. We forget the first dApps were Bitcoin powered, multi-sig escrow, provably fair betting, proof of existence. The list goes on and on. If we're going to realize this potential, we have a lot of work to do. And so, honestly, to all the people in Bitcoin Magazine who made this happen. Think you know who you are. Great fucking job. And I am really excited to look forward to seeing how the content changes, the platform changes, how just the entire attitude changes, and how much that spreads through the rest of the ecosystem. Because frankly, there is way too much time, effort, and resources spent on bullshit and dead end pipe dreams instead of what's actually practical to build and engineer. And it is just awesome to see the oldest publication in this ecosystem moving back towards what actually matters and cutting out the bullshit.
Yeah, just really excited about that news too. Just to hear those statements and know that, you know, one of these major publications is going to come back and really focus on Bitcoin. I mean, you know, the major news outlets that have sort of cropped up since all this mania, you know, basically all is crypto and generalized and coins generalized. And, you know, it's good to hear that somebody else is going to focus mainly on Bitcoin developments and what's going on in the Bitcoin ecosystem, just to kind of at least give other people another place to go to get good information. I mean, that's just been dying and dying as these years have been going on with all this, ICO mania and Ethereum mania and all this different mania is really kind of pushed people away from what Bitcoin was here for and the problems we were solving, and kind of just cast them in the shadow of this buzzword craziness. So it'll be really great to see a good publication sort of just coming back to the roots and, you know, doing something that's going to be real helpful for the ecosystem. So kudos, Bitcoin Magazine. I'm also looking forward to following these developments in the weeks and months ahead to see what you guys are doing over there. Really awesome stuff.
All right. And here we are at the final thoughts. Janine, you're up.
Yeah, so speaking of what journalists are choosing to focus on, apparently WikiLeaks is now crowdfunding to sue The Guardian, because as anyone who's been to the UK or looked at the UK legal system knows, it's very expensive to go into a legal battle with someone who libels you, or libel cases in general are very expensive. So please help them, because The Guardian published what has ended up being proven to be a completely fabricated story from someone who the documents that they used were fake, and they came from someone who is known for being a serial fabricator, who coincidentally is he has a political stance against the former president of Ecuador, and is probably probably inserted these fake documents to very stupid Guardian journalists who are known for publishing fake stories, aka Luke Harding. And so that was probably how they got the documents in, because Luke Harding's an idiot. So please help them destroy the Guardian, because the only thing that the Guardian is good at guarding is elitists and billionaires and oppressive states. So please do that.
Yeah, you know, while you were saying that, yeah, definitely support these guys, you know, to help fight that. But it just reminded me, oh yeah, it was Peter Thiel that took down Gawker because of that Hogan sex tape and the libel case in there, or the defamation or whatever it was. But it did take billions basically to get that thing down. So, you know, maybe Peter Thiel needs to invest in this case instead of EOS. I don't know. It sounds like it would be helpful.
All right. Give us a final thought.
Oh man, a final thought today. Just keep grabbing that popcorn, because this ABSV madness is going to keep continuing. It's been a lot of fun and a lot of updates, and so yeah, just keep that popcorn popping, guys.
Alrighty. For me, I'm gonna make a demand. This is the origin of my Australia gets high and cuts off its own penis comment at the start of the show. I demand internet points from all of you right now. Twitter, internet points. Give them to me. On that note, I'm going to go sleep because my brain is still on Asia time. So I guess next episode will be Sunday. And at that point, we should be back to the normal schedule. Toodaloo till then, everybody.
Later, everybody.